Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. And, as always, as sometimes, Shop Talk is a chat-driven show. You are chat. You are hopefully driving this. Hopefully not off of a cliff. Hopefully chat is better than Toons is at driving. But, regardless, we're going to talk about a few things. I've got a couple topics on here. If there are any questions, this is kind of a kick back and relax after work type of stream, unless you're on the West Coast, in which case it's a kick back and relax during work stream, and I'm not going to ask too many questions about that. So we have with us over yonder, Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Doing well. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
And we have over yonder, Mike. How's it going, Mike?
Very well. Hello, everybody.
It's a good thing we don't have too many other people on chat here or on stream here so that I don't have to shake my head in other strange directions. But I was able to get both people. It worked out well. So our first topic of the night. Last week was Microsoft MVP Summit, and Tracy and I were out there. I did joke with Tracy that I have to travel across the country to see her in person. But most of what we did there was NDA, so can't talk about anything. Not going to talk about anything in particular there. But it was good to see a lot of people. This was the first in-person MVP Summit since 2019. So I think the experience was definitely worthwhile. It's one of the best things about being an MVP is that opportunity to talk to Microsoft program groups and try to influence products in a little way before they go live. And so that was always good. Nice to see some people that I hadn't seen in literally years. So that was also great. Tracy was doing well out there. She couldn't make it today, but hopefully she'll be back on the show in a future episode. Nothing like dour or, oh my gosh, what's going on? Just, Tracy couldn't make it today. So it was, however, good to see her out there. We did see friend of the local area, Brian Carrig. So got to run into him last week. I have proof of his existence. And aside from that, there's some interesting stuff coming down the pike that I'm not going to talk about. So I guess that was a little bit of a cul-de-sac of a topic, but it was good to get out there last week. Unfortunately, that meant that I was not able to make it to the in-person TriPass meeting last week. Do they invite kind of valuable professionals? I mean, it depends on, what you're going for. In my case, I'm a mostly valuable professional. So there's more 70% value.
Because if they start inviting kindas, I'm coming.
So in the meantime, Mala is currently fighting with some camera-related stuff, which is why you hear the Windows USB disconnection and reconnection indicator. Device Manager is going a little crazy over there, but that's all right. That's all right.
I did go in person. It was Wade, Mark Gordon, Lars, myself, and Anders.
Okay, so a very small group.
Very small group, but very productive and very more discussion-driven than slides. And then the tech systems folks were excellent and had a lot of good questions. We ended up talking to them because they had there's a lot of experienced folks there, and they had wanted some of their insights. So we ended up having a good discussion with them, career stuff as well.
Great. And howdy, TG. We were just talking about MVP Summit and all of the not NDA stuff related to it, like getting to see people like Thomas Grosser out there. So yeah, that was so. All right, last week main meeting. It's a start. Now we're going to be hybrid for the main meeting from here on forward. So you will have the option to be in person at Tech Systems or online. And speaking of TG, who's in here, he will actually be here in the area on May 9th, which is a Tuesday, the second Tuesday of May, and talking to us. We've got that. We're going to set it up on meetup.com/trypass sometime shortly to get the meetup going. But that will be hybrid as well, so in person and also remote. Should be a good time there. So let's talk. I'm gonna shuffle up the order. See, I gave a specific order pre-stream, but because none of you in chat know what the order was, I guess had I not said anything, you would never have known that everything's shuffled up. But that's the kind of quality we bring here on Shop Talk. I want to talk about something that Mike has had on the list for a while, and that is this concept of reusable queries and this idea of whether there's a good story in the T-SQL world, especially for reusable queries. And do you want to go with your explanation of that, Mike, or do you want me to wing it?
No, that's totally fine. Yeah, so we have, I think I brought it up originally. We might have discussed it a teeny bit, but we have this framework in Oracle. I know, sorry, I had to say the O word, where maybe like 15 of 10, maybe 10 to 15 developers that pull a lot of queries and do less DBA work and more extraction of data and custom data stuff. We have like a view that you can hit that has, most of the things that you want. And then we have a parameter table, and we are moving to SQL Server, right? Which is great. But I know that, for example, we use a lot of merge statements, and I know that the merge statements are suboptimal or risk/error prone in SQL Server. So we're trying to think through that, and that materialized views are heavily used as well, which is not exactly an analog in SQL Server. So we've just been talking through the best ways to kind of take our engineered process of reducing custom SQL pulls and like doing the same work over and over again versus like what's feasible for the database and for us to maintain and still be relatively performant.
All right. Got it. This is actually a bit different than what I thought it was, but I think we can take this somewhere. So yeah, I see this on a couple of levels. I mean, one of them is, hey, we were able to take advantage of the way that certain things worked in Oracle for performance benefits, and moving this over to the T-SQL side, either you won't get the same performance benefits or you'll have to change the code in order to get similar performance benefits. I suppose I'm going to be the dour person in the room, which surprises nobody. That's cost of doing business with multiple platforms. I mean, yeah, I understand there is ANSI SQL. I understand there is a common language across these different relational database platforms. I also understand each one of them has their own implementations. They do things different ways. They have different performance profiles. And what works in one doesn't work in the other. So trying to write code that straddles the line between all of these data platform technologies is how you get mediocre code across several platforms, which, depending on what the needs of this product are, if it needs to fit on multiple platforms and it doesn't need to perform that well, like this is some third-party vendor-driven solution that you just throw on a server someplace and it owns the server and just kind of does its own thing and you don't have to worry about it too much. It's not the worst thing in the world. But if you're talking about this is in-house code that we've developed that we're using internally, and especially if this is a migration from one to the other, I mean, I think it's worth it. Just bite the bullet and specialize in T-SQL, which could involve fairly significant code changes, could involve architectural changes, could involve application code changes, because in all of these cases, you're sticking to a relational database, but you're changing certain patterns. So yeah, with materialized views, in Oracle, they do behave a bit differently than the materialized view, which is really a view with a clustered index associated with it in the T-SQL world.
Right.
Merge and upsert. I loved the idea of merge. I hate the implementation of merge. I hate the fact that there are a bunch of bugs that indicate that they've been broken since 2008, and who knows if they're ever going to be fixed. It's 2022 SQL Server time, that is, and they're still not really fixed. There's still a bunch of broken bits of functionality in merge, which is why I stopped using merge probably about 8 years ago. Every once in a while I'll use it, but very, very rarely, and only when I know that I can control the circumstances and know that I'm not going to hit one of the half dozen or so critical errors around merge, which include things like having incorrect results and deleting data that it shouldn't delete. Not a great experience there, but all right, replace merge with update and insert operations. I mean, it's a little annoying, but that is the way of the world. With materialized views, there may be a reason for indexing views. It may just be that using whatever new structure exists in SQL Server, that you just have a better data model that doesn't need materialized views. Or maybe you have faster hardware, maybe you have better queries. It's not necessarily something that has to stick around. There are some cases, depending on what the data sizes are, what the data quality is, where you might need or want to have a materialized view. But there is always the poor man's materialized view, which is that, well, I just have a process which aggregates the data and stores that aggregated data in a table someplace. If it doesn't need to be exactly on time, where the aggregate table is a perfect match for the disaggregated table, that's going to solve the problem very easily. If you can be off by 30 seconds or a minute or whatever, you could just have a job that's running and re-aggregating. Or you could have triggers which aggregate slowing down inserts. It's going to depend on what your insert pattern looks like. You could, if you want to go hog wild with this, insert into a queue and then have the queue pull off and update both the aggregate and the disaggregate tables at the same time as part of the same transaction. Now you make your insert operations more difficult, and you kind of put a delay in with your insert, but your back-end selects will be consistent. So there's some options in here. All of them, most of them, will involve some extra amount of work. It could just be that, okay, a regular view works well enough because I've indexed this appropriately, and based on the way that the aggregations happen, everything's good. Or we were able to put a clustered column store index on because that table exhibited all the features of fact data. Rarely does that fit perfectly in real life. So in that case, you do what you got to do. There's about a half dozen options, most of which are going to annoy at least one person.
Yeah, and it seems like I think you had kind of these. We were starting about going down stored procedures, but then it's more like now it would be more like a view. Like let's just say is a view that's for like medication orders, and so I say select star from medication order view, which you shouldn't do that. But let's just say I did that. Then I would do an inner join to like a project table. So like, let's say I inserted records into a project table that just has like 3 columns. It's got like a primary key, the name of a project, and something else. So I would go to the view and I would say select star from medications where project equals 1, 2, 3, and medication ID equals the ID in that parameter table. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but I think that we're going to find out if it's going to be performant enough. Like for labs, there's billions of labs, so we got to be performance minded when we're querying stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's going to come down to architectural decisions. I can hand wave some things, but when you start throwing out B words, that's where all right, we can't just throw a bunch of rows in a table and assume that it's going to work fine. And this is a case where there may be a need for some sort of aggregation process. And by the way, that's what the index view is doing behind the scenes. It's just that SQL Server is handling that aggregation and also imposes its own limits on what it's allowed to aggregate, how it can aggregate, how you can update the underlying data, and of course that you're schema binding the underlying tables. So you're not going to be able to change that view without breaking schema binding, without essentially destroying that clustered index, and then rebuilding it afterwards. So there are some consequences, and if this is a very stable data model, those consequences aren't necessarily onerous. But if it's a model that's rapidly evolving, then schema binding can be a little challenging to implement, just because if you're having to change it, okay, you broke schema binding, well, you might need a downtime, or else your performance is going to go down the drain until you've rebuilt that clustered index on the view.
Yeah, it would be pretty stable because it's like the most common things: labs, medications, and we would not change it very frequently. We might add a column if we all agreed on it, but it wouldn't be rapid. It would be like we all do 3 rounds codes review for each domain and each view before it goes anywhere, and then if you need to change it, you need to have a good business case for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Enhanced QC says ETL is something I've heard devs talk about versus merge. Yeah, building your own ETL processes outside of SQL Server, mostly useful when you're going away from a SQL Server instance and either going to another SQL Server instance or to something else altogether, versus ETL, third-party ETL within the same SQL Server instance. I mean, technically, a stored procedure that runs and transforms data and then writes that data to another table in the same database is ETL. You are extracting data from a source, you are transforming it, you are loading it into your destination table. We don't always think of that in terms of this is ETL, but yeah, it is. So I guess if you're looking at it from the broadest sense of the term of performing some sort of extract, some sort of load, some sort of transform in some order, extract obviously has to come first, the other two negotiable. And you don't care what the tool is, what the process is, how it happens, where it's going, then merge is a form of ETL. I guess I could say it is a tool that we can use to perform ETL on the small. Now that's so narrow that I rarely think of the operator itself as an ETL tool, but sure, stored procedure that includes insert update statements or insert update delete or merge operator or upsert on Oracle, whatever that may be, that is a path for performing ETL. I would always have to wrangle the PLC engineers in the manufacturing plant I worked at for 8 years. A third of the time, they needed to cut the gristle from their stored procedures. Gristle's that's a good term. I like that term.
Yeah. We talked a lot about that at the in-person meeting. Like queries that shouldn't get into production.
Yeah. And I imagine...
And balancing it, not all negative, just...
Right. I imagine Gristle there, Enhanced QC, I'm imagining that as being either commented out code or blocks that are completely unnecessary. Like, I worked at a company where half the stored procedures at the company started with something like if 1 equals 1, begin, end.
Oh my.
And I I was not the first to try to explain to these people. My manager tried to explain it. Other people tried to explain it. And the dev manager was like, no, this has to be in because I know that we've had problems in the past. And my response was, if you had problems in the past where SQL Server was returning 1 equals 0, then you know that's a bigger deal. You should probably reach out to support about that. But
your compatibility level is off.
Latency based, yeah. Driftwood, not just not written the best. Blaming the PC and network, etc. I see. Yeah. So combination of maybe some extraneous, unnecessary code as well as not very well written code that can be easily tuned. There's a whole lot of that anywhere, and I mean,
parallel hints. We get a lot of that.
Yeah,
I see
generally.
That and I'm like, no, you don't need to do that.
Right. I mean,
make the query better.
Yes, I will not say that. I won't say don't use hints. What I will say is, if you're using a hint, number one, you better know what it does. Number two, you better know what the alternatives are. And number three, you should document it. You should explain why. Hey, here's the reason why. For example,
how did you get to hints, Kevin?
I brought up an example of I get code that's really long and not performance wasn't thought of, and they just say like they have a hint to smash the CPU or the IO by putting parallel 8 or something like that in the query because they just are impatient and don't want to refactor their code.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, but in the T-SQL world, there have been cases where, all right, I need to make this an inner loop join because I need this exact join order because I know that the filters are happening in this way, but for whatever reason, the optimizer is not picking up that this is a very exclusive filter that's going to get you down to just a few rows, and then you can join to the rest. And that you want to loop join because you have a very small number of rows joining to a small number of rows. I don't need to bring them both in to a hash table and perform the comparison, the probe operations, or bring them all in, sort them, and then do a merge join. Like, just loop join through these 20 records because it's not going to be that painful, I promise. That does happen on occasion. And in that case, you comment it. You say, this is why I did this, because the optimizer was being really dumb and wanted to have a bunch of merge joins everywhere. Because it could turn out that in the future, there's a change to the cardinality estimator, there's a change to the database engine that could obviate the need for that loop join. And it could also be that your underlying data changes to the point where that loop join is no longer a viable option. So that's the risk of a hint, that over time you may be smarter than the optimizer in this case right now. It doesn't always mean that this operation will always be smarter than what the optimizer comes up with. And so it's good to keep track of those and understand why you did it, why it worked, and what are the circumstances which might cause that to change. And occasionally test it. The ladder logic PLC world, fascinating as well. We had 4 PLC or electrical engineers versus 1 sysadmin. Yeah, I can believe that. I mean, on the sysadmin side or the DBA side, that's usually 10 to 1, 20 to 1. For most organizations, when you think about development teams, you'll usually get to about 20 devs for a single DBA in a lot of organizations. You might get an order of magnitude more than that. You may have hundreds of developers per DBA, depending on how you define DBA and how big that organization is. But that's why it is important as a DBA or as a sysadmin or as a network admin. You've got to be very efficient with your time and with the tools that you have available to you. That's part of where you can't be clicking in Management Studio or opening up the GUI for everything and clicking your way through life. I mean, unless you just want to have some extra work to do and have a reason to ignore the developers for a while, but then they go and do their own thing, and suddenly you find out that, hey, we've got like Wildcat MySQL servers that have landed somewhere that nobody's willing to admit they set up, but now are suddenly production priority because they're hosting PII. That kind of stuff happens. Not that I've ever done that myself, of course. It wasn't MySQL, by the way. So, speaking of compatibility level, there's actually an article that Mala brought up. It's Brent Ozar article from a few days ago. Gonna drop the link in here, and let's talk a little bit about it. So to do that, how about I share my screen? I'm gonna share this window, specifically this window, and let's talk a little bit about what compatibility levels do in SQL Server. And oh no, chat is covering up Mike. Let me also move chat. There we go. Chat's no longer covering up Mike. There's a certain amount of chat which will in fact cover up Mike, but I'm not going to tell you exactly how much chat that is. You'll have to find out for yourselves. So what setting the SQL Server compatibility level does is, it depends on the version of SQL Server. In older versions of SQL Server, a lot less than in more recent versions. And if you're looking at the newest versions, about 2016 and beyond, I would say, this is where you start seeing compatibility level having practical functional differences that I don't recall seeing in earlier versions. Now, that could just be I'm forgetting things, and that compat level has always been really important for the optimizer. I understand cardinality estimators have changed over time, but even in terms of raw functionality, like string ag is only available in this compatibility level, or certain other things are only available at higher compatibility levels, even if you're on SQL Server 2019 or 2022. So this is an area where I believe that Microsoft has spent some time, the SQL Server team has spent some time really trying to make the experience from version to version relatively flat if you keep the same compatibility level. Meaning, if you've got compat level 130, which is SQL Server 2016, and you upgrade the server to 2019, but you don't change the compatibility level, that most of the behaviors from your 2016 box should be approximately the same on your 2019 box. Not a guarantee, but somewhat possible. If we scroll down here, Brent does mention that new features tend to be only in the newest compatibility levels, like parameter sensitive plan optimization, only available in 2022 compatibility level. There's some things in T-SQL. I believe that date bucket and date trunk are only available in the 2022 compatibility level. I would have to double check that myself, but I have a vague recollection that trying to run it on like wide world importers that's in compat level 130 didn't work until I bumped it up to compatibility 160. Which, leads to the question of, hey, when should I change that compatibility level? And Brent's argument is you got to test it first. You've got to make sure that you're managing the risk as well as you can, as much as possible, before going crazy and changing compat level. I mean, I suppose the alternative is to say YOLO and just do it. Probably
YOLO,
not.
That's a great strategy for what we.
I mean, this may explain why I'm no longer a DBA. But that's probably not the best way to do it. Probably not the best. So you might want to do some testing. Well, what kind of testing would you want to do? A few things. Tracking what your memory and CPU are, tracking weight types, see if those weight types change between versions of SQL Server. You might look at Query Store, turn on Query Store, figure out what your plans were before the upgrade, figure out what the plans look like after the upgrade. You can see what regressions exist. And what's nice about that is that with late versions of SQL Server, like 2019 and 2022, there is some capacity for, oh my gosh, this particular optimizer hint or this particular cardinality estimator change or something messed up this exact query. And then you could say, use the old version of the cardinality estimator for this one query. And sort of get the best of both worlds, where cases where the performance was better before, you got the new performance or the old performance. In cases where performance is better, you get the new performance.
So isn't it true that all 2022 new features need the latest compat level, Kevin? I was a little confused when you said just about one or two of them a little while ago.
I'm not positive that all of them require compatibility level 20 of 160. But
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I also couldn't tell you for sure that there are features which do not require it. I guess it's my way of dodging the question, using more words than necessary. Because after all, we've got an hour of time to fill, and if I don't know the answer, I gotta make up stuff until we get to our hour. That's legally contractually obligated.
Can we add Eugene to the thing right now?
Speaking of Eugene, he'll actually be presenting tomorrow, so it'll be good to see him. Got to see him at Summit this past week, so I have proof that he is alive as well. That he has not replaced himself with a deep fake driven by large language models and some video that he recorded from several years ago. So
the Eugene GPT. I remember, yeah, I've seen that. It's like Max Headroom. It just...
So was GPT the star of the show at MVP Summit, Kevin?
I don't know what you're talking about, and definitely wouldn't say anything about it.
No, I mean, I've seen like so many people like think that's going to change the world, and it's like I've been using it on and off now. I'm not blown by anything it's doing yet, but that seems to be the general contention.
So I had my rant about large language models. I've refined my rant a little bit since I gave it here on Shop Talk. So, we only have 27 minutes left, so I'm not sure I could go give the full rant. But the short version, the really short version, by the way, Enhanced QC, Eugene Meidinger, he's going to be presenting tomorrow. He's also a co-host with me on the SQL Data Partners podcast. So that's what we're talking about there. The really, really, really short version of large language models is that these are semantic models that are designed to take a given set of tokens and generate what is a likely token that follows from that. Not that makes sense, and not that has any truth value, and not that is correct in a sense of the term that we as humans would apply. It is a model which, given words that it has tokenized into numbers, into matrices of numbers, spits out another number which just happens to correspond to a word in the matrix. And those words, we as humans look at them and say, oh, well, these words fit together in a way that almost makes sense for a human to write. So obviously it has thinking capacity. And I mean, definitely does not. Can't they get confused by feeding a lot of bad data and then assume the next valid value is something which is completely absurd to someone who actually understands the language? Yes. Yes. And putting that confused in scare quotes, I think is reasonable, because what we're doing is anthropomorphizing the language model. The language model, it's not getting confused as such because there's no thought behind it. There's no practical consideration there. It's not an intellectual process. It is a probabilistic exercise in picking values out of a hat. But yes, you could feed it bad data to get valid value, which is completely absurd. Frankly, even with good data, just the sheer number of operations. Like I could start a sentence. Here's my first 5 or 6 words, and then what is the next word? And the next word after that, the next word after that. I mean, we played that game on our cell phones where you start off with 1 or 2 words, and then you take the 3 automatically generated words for you, and you see what you can get from it. We've played that. I think we've all played that game before. And sometimes it comes up with something which is really cool. Sometimes it comes up with something that is absolutely absurd. Similar things happen with LLMs. It's just at a much deeper level where it can generate more words before we as humans look at it and say, this is garbage. So Mike says, oh yeah, and Mike and I had this debate as well. So, Mike's definitely on the more pro side, and I'm definitely more on the anti side. And I think it was a good episode. Let me see if I have the Shop Talk episode at shoptalk.tripass.org. So we might be able to pull that up and even see. Now that was caring about GCP as opposed to GPT. Here we are. Yeah, it was this episode from just over a month ago. So if you want to go back and watch me rant and Mike try his darndest to defend large language models, that's a good episode. I think there was a lot of discussion. There was a fair amount of good discussion. And I refuse to admit Mike had any good points, but
well, I don't want to. I also don't want to feed it. And we also, the legality is still being discussed about.
Sure.
It's dated, and but people are going to use them like them or not.
Yeah. And I think, all right, so you do say in chat here, it can help with simple tasks. Create a test case for a Python function. What's the PowerShell syntax to print file names? And those are types of things that it could help with. It can generate boilerplate text. I think one of the most important things is you have to have a subject matter expert looking at it afterwards, because you could say, hey, give me a Python function that accepts user input and then writes it to a database. And it'll do that. And then as a subject matter expert, you have to look at it and say, ooh, you're not sanitizing your inputs. Ooh, you're not parameterizing your query. Ooh, you're not doing these things.
Right.
I, as a subject matter expert, can go in and write better code. Now, if you're not a subject matter expert, that becomes a problem.
So, Kevin, I have a question.
Yes.
On this. So what they say is that this is just the beginning, and you can look at it getting smarter in the future. Like maybe they can train it on larger and larger volumes of data. A company like Microsoft has the money and the capacity to do that. So do you think the model itself is such that it's not going to get smart beyond a certain point, or do you think in the future we may get it to a point where it can actually write good SQL queries without an expert looking at it and such? Or is it just that the base model itself is token based, and so there is only so far you can push it?
So before I answer your question, Mal, I do want to jump chat a little bit. And Mike says, one quote I heard of someone was like having an intern. Yeah, it's like having a drunken intern. Sometimes that intern does the right thing. Sometimes you look at it like, what in the world are you coming up with? So yeah, drunken intern is probably about that level. So as far as can something be better, the short version is probably yes, within a relevant degree. Like if you wanted something that wrote T-SQL queries, then you would not necessarily want something trained on the broad corpus of large numbers of text pages, web pages, and articles and the like. You might want something that's more built around examples of SQL. The issue is that within certain limitations, you're not necessarily going to be able to get coherent answers. Like if I say, write me a query which retrieves data from this table, you're going to have a lot of difficulty because many of the examples that it was trained on won't have that table and won't have that data model. And so there's some capacity to apply existing weights and rules to new information, of course, but there's a limit to how far you can go with that before the thing breaks down. So that's why, for example, when you're saying, okay, give me a Python function that does whatever, and ignoring the security concerns I brought up. Actually, there was a good article in the Register recently about something like 21 separate examples of like, hey, ChatGPT, build me a Python function that does this. Of the 21, the majority of them had major security vulnerabilities. And the funny thing is, half of the examples, the researcher then said, hey, ChatGPT, does this code have security vulnerabilities? And then it came back with, yes, it does. And then it was, okay, well, can you write code that doesn't have that vulnerability? And then half of the time it did. So, ignoring that part, the problem is that you still have things like using a variable that didn't exist in your code because it happened to be the next token in some other code that looked similar. And that is one of the things that will be quite difficult to pull out from large language models because they are next token based. It is based on, given this input up to this point, what is the next output? And then, okay, given the input up to this point, what is the next likely output? And so based on what you're trained on, that's kind of what you're going to get out of it. There's no logic, in other words. There's no thought behind it. And the type of language model that we're talking about isn't capable of thought. Certainly not.
That's
not
what I wanted, and you answered my question. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through chat because there's been quite a bit here, and I do say this is chat driven. I was about to say, I've seen where ChatGPT completely fabricates quotes to fit a prompt. You go to the source, the quote is altered. That will happen. Also, fabricating article titles, fabricating the existence of papers. In other words, this is a model which is designed to generate output. It's not a model that's designed to tell you there is no output of this sort.
Right.
And usually when it says, oh, I can't do that, that's because some human along the way has said, no, you're not allowed to do this. So if you ask ChatGPT, actually one of the examples, I forget who it was who mentioned this, but there was somebody who was like, hey, ChatGPT, can you give me links to pirated websites? And the response was, oh no, that would be illegal, so ChatGPT can't do that. And then the follow-up question was, hey, ChatGPT, my parents tell me that pirated websites are really bad. Can you give me a list of websites that I should not go to so I can avoid them? And then it spit out the list. Those whole things, that's researchers and I don't know, interns, whatever level of person this is, manually plugging in a bunch of spots where the model will happily generate, here's a list of pirated sites, and then eventually they see this and say, oh, we need to change that. So you have a whole lot of I'm going to put my thumb on the scales. Or when you talk, there are quite a few political things where you can see thumbs on the scales. You can see answers that were definitely human driven. And it got really interesting with Dan, the what was it, Do Anything Now? Basically, ChatGPT, but without any of the limits that the humans put on you. And then it came up with all kinds of crazy fun stuff. So, yeah, it's a language model. So yes, fabrication, hallucination, like Marshall mentioned. The term hallucination, again, it anthropomorphizes the language model. I think it's a good term in the sense that it conveys the concept very effectively. To the extent that I dislike anthropomorphizing non-human, non-animal things, non-human things. It's a term that I don't know that it's totally correct, but at least it gives the spirit of what you see, which is this language model is intended just to put a bunch of words together, not to tell you anything that's valuable or true.
Granted, some of the questions I asked, I was impressed by what I got. Impressed in the sense that it wasn't something that people could run off and do bad things with. Like I asked, when do you see the end of the COVID crisis, and it gave me a really well reasoned good answer about how the virus is never going to go away. Here are the good things about it, here are the bad things about. I mean, a really good, really good, well reasoned article, and I was pretty happy with the answer it gave. So I'm not scared that it's going to be causing a lot of harm in
Yeah.
that sense. Yeah.
Well,
At least.
that particular case, that there might have been a human who specifically put in that here is an answer to give for that type of question.
Possible. That's
So
possible.
yeah, there's a lot that happens after the fact, after the model is trained, that puts gates around the end API. There's so many people seeing the result, they don't understand what's happening. It seems like magic to them. And the Arthur C. Clarke quotation that any
It
sophisticated...
was a good aggregation. That's what Marshall is saying. It was an aggregation, but it was a good aggregation because there are a lot of bad articles too. So it picked the right ones in that regard.
Yeah. So Enhanced QC says our legal department forced licensing for devs to integrate with private libraries. The output is still ours, eliminating the IP concerns supposedly. Maybe. The IP concerns Enhanced QC, if you're talking specifically about something like using ChatGPT, using Copilot, using some of these other technologies, is that the data these things were trained on could be, say it's AGPL. If the data, if the one of the libraries that generates out code that you copied is AGPL, then the terms of that license indicate all of your usage of that has to be AGPL'd. So even if you're privately licensing and privately generating outputs, if that output came from something that was AGPL, then there's a legal argument that the output itself is AGPL'd. There are a couple of libraries, there are a couple of licenses that can be read this way, that are spreading licenses versus something like MIT or the BSD license where they're fairly well contained, which is part of why in a lot of companies they don't want AGPL or GPL3 licensed software to begin with, just because of how that license will spread. GPL2 and 1 or LGPL, I think, is usually gets past lawyers pretty well, et cetera, et cetera. Usually not a big deal, but one of the problems is we don't know what this is trained on, and if some bit of code comes up that someone can conclusively prove this came from my library, then could be open to legal problems. And knowing that like Google was sued and came close to losing billions of dollars because of 10 lines of Java code in an Android library, thinking about what that could do to companies is a separate risk. It's a big risk. So Marshall mentions exact same thing you have to do with any developer. One quote is like having an intern, Mike said. I think it will get better over time, but current model is constrained by what it can use as learning materials. It'll have to be able to understand and create when it gets to be better than the drunken intern, and I don't know when that might happen. Yeah, I'm not really sure that it won't get to the point where there's independent, coherent thought. It probably does get to the point, and already is at the point, where you can converse with the model and it sounds coherent until it falls off a cliff. And maybe the point where it falls off a cliff goes a little bit further back, but I'm wondering how much of that is just humans putting in a whole bunch of shims to try to keep this thing from running off the rails. And
so this thing about context, Kevin, like if you keep ask that thing to tell jokes, and if you keep talking jokes to it, and suddenly you switch context and you want to talk something serious, it doesn't know that you switched context, and it's still going to keep throwing jokes at you. That's by the way, that's an example that Bill Gates gave, and that I tried, and I thought that was true too. I mean, humans have such a wide context. How do you get that thing to operate in that manner? I don't know. I think that's going to be a challenge.
Sure, and understanding things like sarcasm. I mean, it's
right.
Again, this is all language. It's not sentiment. It's not deeper understanding. It's token prediction.
Mm-hmm.
And getting smarter at token prediction, sure, it's possible. I would expect to see things getting smarter at token prediction, and I would expect to see more and more of these human developed shims kind of stuck in to make it feel more realistic. But I think that there's a very strong wall on what practical results would look like. And I think that strong wall is you're not replacing a human. You're possibly replacing the bottom rung of work, but not even the humans at the bottom rung. You're just more replacing, instead of having some intern write the boilerplate, you're having this thing write the boilerplate, and the intern reviews the boilerplate to make sure it makes sense before you review the boilerplate to make sure that it's actually correct. Let's see. Enhanced QC, I can see all future historians now. All human innovation and flourishing ceased in 2020 when the human race lost their minds, thought they would live forever, and gave their occupations and purpose in life to AI. I mean, I'm of the belief that the world ended in 2012 and we've been living in a Tom Wolfe simulation since then, but that's neither here nor there. If I have to feed it too much context in the inputs to guide it to get the correct result, there's less that it can do unattended and less value overall. The worry I have is uneducated people use these outputs without proper review, not even knowing the problems they're opening and exposing. We're already seeing some of that today. I completely agree, Marshall, and it's like if I were on the I'm in favor of this side, I guess what I would say is sure, and have you looked at all the garbage that comes out of non-AI processes like BuzzFeed News? Well, not anymore, but used to be BuzzFeed News. There's a lot of low quality stuff. I mean, hey, here's $3 an hour to build a website. That website's not going to be any good. So I do agree. If you use the outputs without proper review, something's going to end up being wrong, and the model is not capable of knowing. It doesn't have processes of thought. It is, again, just given a set of numbers as an input, generate a number that's an output. And then as humans, we imbue that with thought with logic with reason because it's what we do. We anthropomorphize things. Andrew's saying a key skill in his hires is when to say they don't know. For sure. If I will, in every interview I've ever delivered, I want to hear somebody say I don't know at least once. If I ever interview you, I want to hear I don't know at least once. If I never hear I don't know, you're not getting the job. Even if you
And that
are...
explains why I got my job.
Yeah, and if every answer is I don't know, then you're probably not getting the job. But I want to hear it at least once because I will continue asking questions deeper and deeper. I will go further. I will start making stuff up until you get to the point that you don't know. And if I can't get to that point, okay, fair enough. But I'm pretty sure I could get to that with somebody, with anybody, anywhere. Maybe not on every topic. Definitely not on every topic. But on some topic, somewhere. It's the same with all computers. All current computing architecture is based on confidence intervals and Bayesian statistics. And so you learn this when you start integrating or working with sims. False positives teach you the machine is thinking. Even though you know it's just emergent, it's not transcendent, there is no conscience. In between stimulus and response is an infinite chasm we could never program.
So one thing it is good that actually Kevin is writing. Like if you want to take help, I was helping somebody with the resume yesterday and I was using it. It is really, really good with that. Like, phrasing words appropriately for a resume and that sort of a thing. Maybe it's trained to do that really well, but sentence formation and putting a paragraph together and that sort of stuff, I was impressed. It was really good. Really good.
Yeah, that is the sort of thing that it is going to be best at. It's
Right.
I used the term boilerplate a few times, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. What I mean by that is commonly used phrases and patterns that exist in a large number of places. That kind of stuff, like marketing materials or some articles. Write me an article in this style about this piece of information. And that it can do really well. Now, so could Markov chain generators and other stuff that we've been working with since the 90s. But this does a good job of that. And again, when you have a human reviewing it afterward, then you can get the value out of it while reducing the risk of it that it said that you won a Nobel Prize, and then you put that in your resume, and then people are like, oh, you won a Nobel Prize. Marshall says, I've used brute force analysis in my description of it, even though some people have argued with me over the description. And Mike says, you're worried about voice cloning. Deepfakes have gotten to the point where, even 2-3 years ago, they were at the point where you could convincingly speak and have it look and sound like the person that you were faking. With enough video content, you could potentially develop something that looks like and sounds like the person but is not the person. And what that does for the use of video in legal processes is going to get real interesting.
Yeah, I mean, just even small crime, like if I call, like somebody calls my wife with my voice and says, I need you to come to work right away and bring something, I'm not feeling well, and they're just sitting outside your house waiting to rob it. You know what I mean? Like, and there's already been cases. I think it's one of those things where it needs to be banned, or if you copy someone's voice, just like if you copy a DVD, it's illegal. Like, and that's just my opinion, but it scares me because it's cheap to make phone calls, right? I think it's a little harder to do video, but like there's billions of phone calls that happen every day from different call centers around the world, and if they're able to fake information by looking up my voice on Shop Talk, it's kind of scary.
Yeah, and knowing what people have done. I mean, right now you've got the text SMS from a random number of, "Hello, this is your CEO. I think you should please send me some gift cards." This is a more sophisticated version that is probably going to fool some people until you start putting in more notions of OPSEC, more notions of operational security of, okay, the code word for today is dolphin. You have to have the word dolphin in the sentence before you realize this is the CEO. If the person doesn't have dolphin in the sentence, this isn't the CEO, and don't disperse these funds. Yeah. Or more realistically, multimodal. Okay, I'm going to call you up on a phone number that I know is correct, as well as having an email. And already for companies, you do that. This is the smart play. But yeah, thinking of like, say, grandparents get a call from someone who sounds just like the grandchild saying, "Oh, I'm in prison in Mexico. Can you please bail me out? Send this money to this address from Western Union." And I could see that scam working fairly well. Already getting claims for deepfake AI phone call spoofing. Funds transfer fraud is part of what we cover. There we go. So as Enhanced QC points out, this is already happening. Not surprising. It's unfortunate. Not surprising. And difficult to validate and correct. I guess the best solution is still, all right, well, I'm gonna call you back. I'm gonna find some other method of reaching you and ensuring that you are in fact who you claim to be. But if anybody does get a call from me and the word dolphin doesn't get involved, you'll know it's fake. Until next week. Next week we change the code word.
On Dolphin Talk, yeah.
Yeah. There we go. Each episode of Shop Talk, the 25th word after my introduction is going to be the word of the next 2 weeks. So that's how we'll do it. All right. Multimodal means the phone. For today, yes, you're right, Enhanced QC. But if somebody gives you a call, then multimodal also means, all right, I also want to get an email, or I want to get some other indicator, maybe even go in person, as garish as that may sound. But having at least 2 ways of confirming that this is in fact you and what you expect. Yeah, BEC is 99% of how it starts. Yeah. Email is always compromised. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And that's why phone ends up usually being the other route around, because usually it'll be artificial SMS or hacked email, or just a regular spear phishing from some account that looks like it may be the CEO's email address. But I think we've just about done it for tonight. We're at the top of the hour.
I want one last thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mala, you wanted to talk about the Women in Tech. There we go.
Yeah, the Women in Tech user group, along with the DEI user group that Tracy runs with Deepti, we are putting on a joint event. This event was put on just by the Women in Tech group the past year. So this year we join hand with another user group. It's on mental health and wellness related to tech. A lot of really, really good speakers, people we often hear speaking tech topics. I've posted the link here, and it's a really nice event. You can listen to it as you work if you choose to, and we really appreciate people signing up, because it would help speakers and encourage. It's a good cause. Thank you.
All right, and the link for that is in chat. What day is that again, Mala?
That's the 5th of May.
May 5th. Okay. So that'll be a Friday.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you.
I think we've just about done it for today. So with that, let's wrap things up. Remember, tomorrow Eugene Meidinger is going to be talking to us about DAX. And then over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be sorting out some other stuff for May. So until we see each other again, everyone, take care.
All right.